evening, everyone. So thank you so much for participating in the IIA Indonesia Forum today. So I see from the registered list today we will have around more than 660 people participant joining us right now. So I bet today we are going to have a fruitful and insightful discussion with respectable speakers here, who will be discussing about how internal auditors can enhance their role in supporting business resilience, especially now as we all know that COVID pandemic has changed the way organization operated and shift toward a more virtual operating model nowadays. And it's also changed the way people live as well. And most of the countries and companies around the globe right now are dragged into recession, economic downturns, and also some of them experience crisis as well. So I think organizational or business resilience will be the main focus for every company to keep moving forward this post-pandemic era. And I guess that's what makes the role of internal audit become more and more crucial and important than ever, right? So to meet the challenge, the question now actually, how can internal audit become more adaptive function and also can serve as a high value contributor in the organization? So this is actually what we are going to discuss today with our speaker here. Today we have two great speakers joining us from Australia. They are both professionals and experts in their respective field. So our first speaker is Rashika Mohan. Hello Rasika, how are you?
Selamat siang, Ibu Dewi. Selamat siang, everybody.
Selamat siang, Rasika. How are you?
I'm very well.
Everything's good there?
Yes, very good.
Thank you for being here with us, Rasika.
I'm very grateful to be here too.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Rasika is the senior strategist and a product designer professional as well. She has over 16 years experience working with corporates and also government sectors to develop their business strategies and design their products and service. And Rasika also experience in leading various program implementation in the organizations. And the next one, our speaker is Patrick Sharry. Hi, Patrick. How are you?
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Nice to meet you, Patrick. And thank you for being here with us as well. So, Patrick is an associate professor at the University of New South Wales and also the Australian Graduate School of Management. And Patrick has over 25 years working all over the world as an educator and also facilitator, Patrick, in the public and also private sectors. So I would like to say welcome, Patrick and Patricia. Good evening, and such an honor to have you both here. And very, very nice to see you both here. I hope everything's good in Australia, So we're up and running. Before I hand it over the room to Rasika and also Patrick, probably I would like to info and remind again to all the participants that Rasika and also Patrick will run an interactive discussion with all of us today, and they will share some polling question for all of us now. So you can all participate later on in the Mentimeter polling, and then probably from there we can discuss on the topic later on. And probably if there's still time, I think we can have some breakout session in smaller group discussion. I think this will be led by Rasika and also Patrick to discuss the topic that's interested in the participant. So I guess I welcome all the audience to actively participate in polling questions, and also please feel free to jump in to ask Rasika and Patrick directly during the session, or else you can actually write down your questions in the chat box. So we can give it, I can give it forward to Rasika and Patrick. It doesn't mind if you can actually post it in Bahasa or English. I think that's all from me. So I guess without further ado, I hand it over the room to Rasika and Patrick, who will together present the material to talk about how internal audit can help the organization to build their resilience. So please give a warm welcome to our panelists today. I hand it over to Rasika and Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. It's really nice to be here again. Before Patrick and I start speaking to you all, in Australia, we undertake a small ceremony at the start of each public presentation, and that's called Acknowledgement of Country. So basically, it's a process where we pay respect to the land on which we're meeting and the traditional owners of the land on which each of us are coming from. So I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which I'm coming. So Australia is divided into many nations and many countries, it's called. So I'm sitting on the Kulin Nation and Bunurong country, which is southeast of Melbourne. Patrick is from Sydney, but he'll talk further about his background in a minute. I'd like to thank IAA for giving us the opportunity to speak with you all. I've been very fortunate in the last few years to speak to many Indonesian audiences, both virtually, so over Zoom, as well as in person, mainly in Jakarta and Bali. So I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you to the IAA team and everyone to make that happen. Now, I'm just going to share my slides and make sure that we can see it. Okay, can you see my slide here?
Yes.
Okay, let me just go full screen.
But it's still not in full screen, Rasika. Okay, already.
How about now? Okay,
yeah.
Great. Okay, so Patrick and I have been asked to talk about the role of internal audit in building business resilience. Now, I'm very sorry, my Bahasa, I don't know more than 3 or 4 words in Bahasa. So, but if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box, either in Bahasa or in English. And of course, Ibu Dewi will help us understand it. So Ibu Dewi gave us a very, very warm and flattering welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as a person. So I live in Melbourne, so which is this little, I don't know if you can see my cursor, my mouse, but this is one part of Melbourne on the right hand side. I've been working in the areas of sustainability, corporate strategy, community development for several years. I used to work in the banking and financial services sector for a long time. And in the car industry, and then I've worked for the government. I've done a whole heap of different things. I'm really interested in strategy and also a topic called systems thinking that we will talk about, and Patrick will talk about in quite a bit of depth today. I love yoga, so I do a lot of yoga and meditation, which is that laughing man on the left. And I also participate in other organizations as an advisory board member. So I work with an education startup that's looking at STEM in schools, and I also support a puppet theatre company, which is probably strange, but I can tell you about that later. Now I'm going to invite Patrick to introduce himself. Patrick, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. Lovely to be here with you today. Thank you for the very warm welcome earlier, Ibu Dewi. A little bit about me. I'm from Sydney. There's our famous bridge there. I teach for the Australian Graduate School of Management, as we mentioned before, on the MBA programs there. And my real interest is in complexity and how organisations can be helped to navigate complexity, and what leadership skills are required, and what roles do different parts of the organisation have in supporting that capability of working in complex situations. And obviously where we are today with coronavirus has brought lots of complexity to us, and we'll talk a little bit about that over the course of the day.
Thanks, Patrick. Very, very privileged to be speaking with Patrick. He's a very experienced individual, and I too have learnt many, many things from him over the last few years that I've worked with him. So, sorry, this is a bit slow. Okay, so just a quick recap of what we will be looking at today. So we'll start off by exploring some key concepts in governance, risk and compliance at a high level, and looking at the role of compliance and audit. My apologies, that should say audit, not compliance on the first line. We'll also visit some trends and opportunities that we believe are going to be important. Now, these aren't going to be new things. They would be things that you would have heard of before already, but we think it's important to bear that in our minds as we take you through some concepts and frameworks. And so that's the next thing. So we'll talk to you about some frameworks that you can use as the audit profession that you come from, to solve complex problems as you go into the new normal. So today is not going to be about giving you all of the answers. We certainly can't do that. We come from different industries, probably different functions in a company as well, but it's going to be about empowering you with some questions you can ask, some frameworks and tools you can go and apply back in your workplace, not just once, but again and again. And so the last point is really, really important. The success of today really hinges on your ability to participate. Both Patrick and I love to hear from audiences. We love questions, and we really like it when people think about what we're presenting, apply it with us, and also ask us some difficult questions. I should be careful when I say that. We don't want too many difficult questions, but we would love some interesting questions from you. So does that sound okay, Ibu Dewi? Is there anything else I need to mention? Does anyone have any questions about that? Is that okay?
It's okay. I think it's great.
Okay, great. So I told you that we're going to make you do some work. And so that's the first thing. We want to learn a little bit about you. So what I'd like to ask everyone to do, and I'll ask Ibu Dewi to say this to you again, perhaps in Bahasa if needed.
Yep.
Could you please go to menti.com and use the code 8722330, please. And while that happens, I'm just going to go to the Menti screen again.
Right. Okay, maybe let me translate it into Bahasa.
Sure.
Bapak
And they'll be able
mohon
to see it as well.
Kita mungkin ada sedikit polling ya, question. Tadi, can you show us again the code?
It's actually up on the screen. So
up
can
on
you
the
see my?
Yes.
Yeah. So 8722330. It's just up on the top.
Right. Okay. It's already coming in, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love how proactive everyone is. I didn't even have to go to the screen and you had already started putting it in. So we'll give everyone another minute or two. We really want to see where you're from and what industry you're from. So Patrick, we've got a lot of people from extractives. And we've got lots of people from, banking. Oh, it's interesting. We've got some people from the education sector as well, Patrick, friends of yours.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay, let's see. We'll just give everyone another 10 seconds. I wonder what this other sector is. There's lots of others.
Yeah. I think you should add more classification on it.
I thought I had too many on this slide.
Others classification.
Yeah. All right, I might keep going to the next one because we have a lot to get through. So now we want to understand what part of the organization are you from? So are you from risk? Are you from compliance, audit, finance, legal? The audit
Audit.
donut is very big.
Yeah, that makes
Which is
sense
probably a
because
good
we
thing.
did, yeah, IIA. IIA event, most of the members come from the internal audit department.
Mm. Got a few compliance. Got another other. Okay, we'll give you another 10 seconds to put your responses into this one. And I'm really interested in the next question actually, so. Okay, all right, we'll keep going. Okay, tell me about the greatest challenge at the moment. What's the greatest challenge that you're facing as audit, risk, compliance, finance professionals? So I think you can type in a word or two here. Technology is your greatest challenge. Now, while that's coming in, if you're happy to do so, can you put in the chat box what part of technology you find particularly challenging? Being agile and adaptive in this new world. Patrick, we've got a few things to say about that.
Yeah.
Doing remote audits.
Yeah.
Technology to do remote auditing.
Mm.
So what aspect of remote auditing are you finding very difficult? We'd be really interested to know. So please put it in the chat box or maybe tell us if you're happy to speak, even, and it can be in Bahasa. Now, I can't actually see my chat box. So Ibu Dewi, can I just ask you to just
probably
monitor that?
I'll just translate it in bahasa ya Bapak Ibu. Mungkin kalau jawaban dari Bapak Ibu teknologi bisa lebih spesifik, Bapak Ibu teknologi apa yang menjadi kendala atau challenge kita yang paling yang kita rasa paling berat ya dari sisi teknologi itu apa sebenarnya? Apakah misalnya IT risk-nya atau justru ketidaktersediaan teknologi gitu ya?
Patrick, do you have any reflections on what we've seen here?
So it's very interesting to see here the challenges of remote audit and also the number of issues around technology and related to that big data analytics, which are coming up commonly.
Yeah. So I should mention Patrick teaches at the universities, but he's also works with a lot of big companies, as you saw. So he's very experienced in seeing lots of different use cases. Okay, all right. Thank you very much for your participation, everyone. I think we had about nearly half the people participate, which is great. Now, while you are doing that, apologies, I'm going to have to flip applications again. Where am I? Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, can you see that okay? No?
Not yet, Rasika?
Not yet. Just give me 1 second. Share screen. Okay, how about that? Yes?
That's good.
That's good. Thank you. I needed some response. Okay. All right. So look, let's really quickly recap where audit fits into an organization, and everyone would be really well aware of this, right? So audit plays a critical role in actually ensuring that an organization complies with what it says it's going to do. it also plays a very important role in ensuring the quality of the risk management framework that an organization has adopted and the completeness of it. So, and we'll talk about that as we go today. Lastly, and very importantly, audit also looks at the controls that are in place to mitigate those risks and to look at the future of a business. So basically, integrating back knowledge and feedback loops through its activities as audit. And so if we look at the relationship between governance, risk and compliance and audit, it's effectively the linchpin which provides valuable knowledge and resources, and it plays a crucial role from a transparency, accountability and integrity perspective. So that independent scrutiny from an external and internal perspective, whether it's in terms of finance and accounting, from a technology perspective, as well as increasingly from a work health and safety standpoint, environment sustainability standpoint, and business continuity standpoint, a very, very important role to play. So the key question for us is to ask ourselves, in what ways will the governance, risk and compliance element of an organization and in turn audit need to evolve in the future? And so for us, we think it's worthwhile just to revisit some of the trends that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. And we must mention that some of these trends were already there, but now they've been accelerated. So the first trend that we're talking about is the ability to work from home. Now, I know that in Australia, for instance, most people have chosen to work from home in their city. I understand from an Indonesian context, either where you were based before the pandemic, or I think some people have gone back home to their hometowns and their home villages. What I thought was kind of interesting and a little bit funny is many folks in the US, especially in the tech centers in the US, have chosen to actually work from rather luxurious places like Barbados. And countries have actually seen this as an economic opportunity, right? So you can see the headline that's there. Now, how exciting, okay? It's very, very exciting, but at the same time, that brings with it a whole heap of different considerations from a process, policy, risk perspective. The next one, I think this is something that we all know, all love, and you've just talked about it, the trend towards digitization and automation. Already there was lots of questions about what's going to happen to employees that were maybe on the lower side from a skills perspective, but there's that trend has actually been exacerbated. And I think the key point here is the fact that we need to keep up with that rate of change. So we know that change is happening, but are we ready for it to happen as quickly as it's happening now? The next is a trend towards either it could be localization, diversification, or some are calling it deglobalization. One of the areas that I was working in previously is really looking at the sustainability of supply chains from a social and environmental perspective, but also in terms of how is it sustainable for a business to have truly global supply chains. And I'm sure, in the Indonesian context, that's something to be thought about here. From an Australian perspective, it has a huge impact for us because there are only a number of sectors in our economy that are truly have a domestic stronghold. The next trend to bear in mind is the shift in regulation. So usually what happens after sort of a seismic event like this is that the fundamental infrastructure and regulatory requirements are likely to change, not just to protect us, but also to ensure that we have the right support mechanisms and structures in place to either stimulate further growth or from a social protection perspective. And so from a regulation standpoint and legislative standpoint, whether it be looking at stakeholder impact, whether it be from a taxation perspective, it could be employment laws, but also things like fraud, cybersecurity, how you use the third-party providers, and related impacts. Patrick, feel free to jump in here anytime if you want to make some additional comments. The next trend that we're likely to see, or that we're already seeing actually, is an increased focus at the board level. So this is particularly pertinent from a GRC standpoint, on looking an increased focus from a risk management perspective. I mean, you know, COVID-19, although it had been, the threat of pandemics had been talked about globally for quite a while, most companies didn't think that it may hit them as hard as it did. And so within a span of a few weeks, maximum a month or two, we had corporations scrambling effectively. And so from a risk perspective, from a supply chain governance, as well as a resilience standpoint, a no-brainer, work health and safety, as well as, you know, we're seeing an increased focus on sustainability and ESG related issues like climate resilience continue to take front and center at the board level. So the next question.
And Rasika, just before you go to the next one there, one of the things that I've observed is the change in perception of boards about how serious they need to be about this governance work that you're talking about. So one example would be a board that I've been working with in the financial services sector. In the regulations in Australia, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, APRA, has a whole list of requirements from a compliance perspective that financial service organisations need to have in place. And the board is supposed to sit down, or the chair of the board is supposed to sit down with the CEO every year and talk about whether they are meeting all of these compliance pieces. So it's a form of audit, but compliance audit. And the chair of the board that I'm working with has said to me that for the past 4 years, he's sat down with the CEO and gone through the list. And one of the questions on the list is, do we have a pandemic action plan? And the CEO has said, yes, we have a pandemic action plan. And he sat down in April this year with the CEO and said, have we got a pandemic action plan? Because we need it now. And suddenly all of these things which had seemed so far off were happening in the moment. And the response to that is that boards that I work with here, that I have associations with in Europe and America, for example, are really increasing their vigilance around some of these issues that in the past they might not have taken so seriously. So the pandemic has really accelerated, I think, that board level attention to these governance issues and all of the audit and compliance work that needs to support those.
It's interesting reflecting on that, Patrick, because to me, what that's saying is board level capability, so the skills that board members need to bring is beyond traditional compliance, due diligence, risk, you know, solid financial management, strategic management. It's actually expanded the capabilities that boards actually need to have and be savvy in. Do you have any reflections on that?
Oh, I think that's definitely true. And it's having an impact on the way that boards recruit new members, for example. They're now being very careful to make sure that they're recruiting the right skill set for the board. Traditionally, that might have been a little bit about who was friendly with who. And now it's become much more serious about who has the skills that are really needed in order to take this governance, this compliance task seriously.
Yeah. One more reflection on that, and we'll keep going. A lot of you, when you talked about the greatest challenge you're facing today, one of the examples that you put up was technology. And increasingly, I think it's going to be really important for a professional to have multidisciplinary skill sets, right? And so this applies at the governance level as well. I've seen boards increasingly look at skills in STEM, so science and technology, just because data and analytics and the use of technology and the adoption of that is skyrocketing. And so whether that be at the governance level or at the operational level, and you'll see it come through when we speak today, working in what we call a multidisciplinary way and an interdisciplinary way is important. You're probably doing that already. I think it's just going to take more and more precedence going forward. Okay, so we'll keep going in the interest of time. So then we come to the question of risk, right? And in what areas will risk have an expanded or an increased focus? We've talked about localization earlier, or deglobalization, for instance, or potentially looking at different approaches to maintaining a global supply chain, but reconfiguring your supply chain in a different way. That itself brings a lot of opportunity, but it also brings different sorts of risks that you need to be thinking about. You've got this fellow on the right here. I think that's a very stereotypical picture of a hacker. My partner works in cybersecurity. He doesn't look like that, but he does do ethical hacking. But basically, you've got increased cybersecurity risk, but you've also got, and this is not just in terms of who can access your systems, but then that translates into risks related to fraud. A lot of you are from the financial services sector, and you would have been working with AML, like money laundering, for a long time. But I think this is just upping it to a different level. And I saw some very, very interesting statistics about cyber threats and the increase in cyber threats just over the last few months, understandably so. The other aspect to think about is, and this is the guy with the no money in his wallet. Effectively, within COVID, companies started with a potential cash flow issue, right? But as the pandemic has persisted, it's become a solvency issue. So can you actually stay alive? And if not, well, what does it mean? And so if you're going to have increased M&A activity, if you're going to have writing off of a write down of assets, what does that actually ask of you, or ask of the risk professionals as well as the audit professionals in terms of what they need to be looking for? I talked about insourcing and outsourcing. That obviously pertains to reconfiguration of supply chains, and I think what you can't miss here is the contract management side from a supply chain or a procurement standpoint. My apologies. I think the last one that I'd like to touch on, which I'm quite passionate about, is mental health. I think someone actually put up, in terms of the challenges that you're facing, the difficulty in actually working from home for a consistent period of time. Now, as I understand it, I think some offices are opening up slowly in Indonesia, and I think the rate of increase of cases has somewhat not stabilized but decreased. But it's a very, very important and pertinent issue for each individual, right? And I'd be very surprised if increased vigilance isn't paid to mental health as part of work health and safety. Patrick, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree very much, Rasika, with that last point around mental health, but it also extends to other forms of health. And I've had a number of conversations recently with organisations who've realised that they have the responsibility to audit the working conditions for people at home, because they have obligations to make sure their employees are safe if they're actually doing the work from home. And so that has expanded the focus, exactly as the slide says there.
Yeah, and I think we talked about remote auditing again in the greatest challenges. If you're a company who's got 6,000 employees, how are you going to actually sufficiently audit their working conditions, for example? That presents a whole heap of different challenges. One of the areas that I work in as part of my sustainability work is an area called modern slavery, and that relates to human rights and the working conditions of people. A traditional way in which we would conduct due diligence, as well as ensure that the right sort of processes or controls are in place, is by doing physical audits of factories, right? Now, the pandemic has just thrown all of that up in the air. Yes, you can do virtual audits, but what is the guarantee that those audits are actually legitimate and credible, so the data that you're getting is actually useful? So all curly questions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and one of the things, Rasika, that would be perhaps interesting to explore in discussion later would be if there are people on this call who are making use of technologies such as drones to help with auditing, because when I was doing some work with a firm that did a lot of auditing 3 years ago, they were just starting to explore the use of drones for fast and remote auditing of facilities and so on. And they were just starting to think about what might be the possibilities for artificial intelligence to help with audit from using the data from the drones. We know that in many other parts of life, one of the things that coronavirus has done is rapidly accelerated the uptake of technology. And so an interesting thing for us to explore would be whether we have examples from people on the call here of using technology like drones in a way that their organisation didn't think about a year or two ago, but now they're trying to utilise that technology to make the audit function more flexible in the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, well, I've put that down as something that that we can discuss. But Ibu Dewi, if you wanted to just perhaps translate what Patrick talked about in the chat window, people can start to think about it in the meantime as well. Okay, we will keep going because time is running. So what we just wanted to, we're not going to talk about this slide too much, but what we just wanted to make sure we recap is the fact that, you know, compliance is actually a function of the regulations that you're bound by, the various different governance, systems of governance that you're bound by, perhaps any industry standards, as well as corporate policies that you are looking at, and anything else that may be specific to your business. Right? What we would like to do next is we would actually like to go into a breakout session. And this is the question that we would like participants to think about. We'd like you to think about how have the trends that we have talked about impacted your work as an auditor. And you can also include the response to the question that Patrick asked, for example. So how have you, for instance, started using technology to undertake your role as an auditor, or something quite innovative? And what we will do is, once we break out into the groups, we'll have around 5 minutes for you to talk about it. And then if you would like to, you can submit that response into Mentimeter. So, Patrick, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth noting, Rasika, for those people who are not familiar with the breakout rooms in Zoom, many people will be, but not everyone, you'll get an invitation to a room and you just need to click on that invitation and it will take you into a small group where you'll have a chance to talk about these things, and at the end of that time, you'll be brought back automatically into the main room where everyone is.
Great.
Yeah, probably I'll translate it, yeah, Patrick and Rasika.
Please go ahead.
It's probably a new thing for us in Indonesia for breakout room. Bapak Ibu, mungkin di sini kita kan ada, ini sebenarnya untuk ini ya, kita discuss lebih enak gitu ya. Rasika and Patrick pengen kita ada small group discussion between us. Nanti akan host akan membuat breakout room. Apa sih yang akan didiscuss di dalam breakout room itu adalah nanti pertanyaan ini, bagaimana tren-tren yang tadi disampaikan oleh Rasika dan Patrick ini impacted to our life as an auditor gitu ya. Nah, nanti kita mungkin host akan membagi Bapak Ibu semua, kita di sini ada totalnya ada sekitar 130 ya, 130 participants all around. I think the host can start to divide and create the breakout. So how many participant ya per room ya, Rasika? Probably 5 to 6 or it's automatically just the breakout. Oke, Pak. Yeah. Pak Eko boleh tolong coba di breakout, Pak. Jadi Bapak Ibu nanti kita akan bahas di masing-masing grup kecil tersebut bagaimana sih impact dari tren-tren yang sekarang ini yang kita hadapi sekarang, terutama di masa pandemik ini, impact-nya ke kita sebagai auditor seperti apa gitu ya. Nah, Bapak Ibu juga bisa mencoba menjawab dari Mentimeter yang tadi nih, yang kodenya masih ada di layar ya. Bagaimana impact kita terhadap tren ini terhadap kita sebagai auditor.
Ini bagi berapa?
So we just can the participants still can post the answer in the Mentimeter, right, Rasika?
Yes. So I'm gonna change the Mentimeter screen now. So I'll do that now.
All right. Okay. Pak Eko boleh dibantu untuk breakout room-nya?
Ya, Bu. Kita coba bagi.
Okay, you should be able to see my Mentimeter screen now.
Yeah, already.
Okay. So they all need to join when it comes up.
Jadi nanti Bapak Ibu akan ada pembagian secara otomatis untuk breakout session-nya. Nanti langsung aja Bapak Ibu silakan join yang ada di layar gitu ya. Klik join aja Bapak Ibu.
So we've got a couple of responses on Menti already.
Yeah. Is the participant that are still here, remain here, they're not in the breakout room, yeah?
Yeah. They might not have joined.
Yes.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, it looks like most people have not joined the breakout room.
Yeah, still around 50 participants here.
That's not bad. There's about 10 then.
Mm.
There's 10. Oh, here we go. So there's about 10 groups that have.
And just encourage people to join those breakout rooms.
Mm. Okay, there's some responses that are coming though, which is nice.
Some of it in Indonesian. Probably I will translate it later on.
Yeah.
Basically, they having a build difficulties in data analytics and verification of the data itself. Yeah.
Does it actually say why that is?
Because, hang on. Yeah, because they still need to do the on-site audit. Yeah, probably because it's still done manually, so they cannot do the verification online. Yeah, I think it's back again on the technology aspect. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Because the COVID's kind of forced us to do everything virtually and online, yeah.
The people who didn't join a breakout room can submit responses straight on Menti as well.
Ya, Bapak Ibu, silakan kalau misalnya ada yang di sini yang belum join di breakout room, mungkin bisa mengisi polling di dalam Menti ini ya, yang kodenya ada di atas. Atau nanti kita bisa langsung discuss juga sih.
Okay, should we bring them back, Patrick? What do you think?
I think that's
Yeah, I think it's quite enough ya. Pak Eko boleh balikin lagi nggak, Pak?
It's a heavy reliance on IT, scanning documents, electronic signatures, photos, etc. Nice. So perhaps, Ibu Devi, once everyone's back, maybe you can just encourage them to submit more of their responses, and if anyone wants to speak, they can as well.
Yeah. Sudah kembali belum ya Pak Eko ya? Belum kayaknya ya?
Sudah Bu.
Masih 47 nih Pak.
Oke.
Oke, selamat datang kembali Bapak Ibu.
Here they come.
Starting to coming back. Selamat datang lagi Bapak Bapak Ibu, gimana tadi di breakout room tempat diskusi nggak? Bapak Ibu, sekarang kita sedang interactive session ya. Jadi kalau misalnya sepi, berarti nggak ngomong apa-apa dong nih Pak.
Justru itu Mbak Dewi, sebenarnya yang what are we expecting to do with in this breakout room?
Oh iya.
We really do not know. Even if you ask to write down in Menti, we do not know how to write it down. How to download this Menti form.
Oh, I see. Harus connect ke ini ya, ke connect ke
we
internet.
really do not know that. But perhaps we can make some draft, for example, and then we can raise that. Okay, that's what we are thinking in our group.
Yeah.
That's what we really do not know. For example, if we choose one of us, for example, choose the competent, are we going to propose what the internal audit is going to be in the next future? Yeah, not considering about this pandemic only, but also the other condition that might happen. I'm still thinking that that in the future internal audit is not. We do not need internal audit anymore. What we really need is the fortune teller. Because the orientation is not the past anymore, but the future. What the next?
Yeah.
Hey, you do not need internal audit. What you need is the fortune teller. Based on the data what we are having now and the trend, that you can, in that case, that we can say, hey, that is what we need.
Yeah.
Either you name you as an internal audit or as a fortune teller. Okay. We do not understand.
Interesting comment, Pak.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, Pak, how do I say his name? Kurniawan? Is that right?
Pak Kurniawan.
You may call me Tejo.
Pak Tejo. Thank you, Pak Tejo. I get very excited when people actually speak on Zoom calls because we can have a conversation. We're not going to necessarily tell you how to read fortune or predict the future, but I'm very excited to say that Patrick is going to present a very interesting framework to think about the future and to think about complexity.
Okay.
And so we would love to have you share your thoughts after you've heard it. Okay, so
because we are rather afraid of considering of such requirement needed such requirement for the internal audit.
Yeah, definitely. So what we might quickly do is have a really quick look at some of the responses that have come on Mentimeter, as well as I think the chat box has some things in there as well, and I don't know what it means. So Ibu Dewi, can you just talk us through some of the commentary in Bahasa on Menti, as well as anything relevant from the chat box?
Yeah, of course. In Bahasa, there are some comments on they having difficulties in the data verification that are given by the auditee because probably the data is only available in the site, so they have to go for the on-site visit, for the audit. Probably it's in line with the first polling question that the struggling is to do the remote audit, Rasika. And what else? Yeah, what else in Bahasa?
It's one on the right here.
There's no application. There's no proper application to do the data analytic and to store the data. Yeah, probably this is related again to technology aspect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I think most of the comments are in English. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. There's one here that says we must use new ways of doing things using new perspectives and new focus, which is related to what
I see the common theme here actually more on the technology aspect. Probably because due to the COVID, many companies here in Indonesia were not ready especially from the technology standpoint, like probably they haven't been equipped with data analytics tools or proper audit management system in place. But suddenly, due to COVID, they have to be ready, or at least to think to invest in the technology because of the limited mobility that we are faced right now, Rasika. I think this is the common theme that happened here in internal audit in Indonesia, the technology aspect.
Yeah, thank you for that. I might invite Patrick to see if he has any reflections on what you've heard, and then you could continue with Kanav and Patrick. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me just...
Now, do you want me to use your slides, or I'll just...
No, I'll do this on my flip chart.
Okay. So while Patrick's doing that, Ibu Dewi, we probably need everyone to switch to speaker view in Zoom.
Sorry
We need everyone to switch to speaker view in Zoom.
So if people go to the top right of the screen where people are, there's a little box that will pop up called View. And if you choose Speaker View there, you'll get a large picture of what I'm going to show you on the flip chart here.
Yeah, actually I can see you, Patrick. Right, and also the flip chart behind you.
So would it be useful to just translate that for everybody, Ibu Dewi?
Ya, oke.
Yes.
Pak Eko, tadi ada feature apa ya, Speak of You itu? Bisa tolong diinformasikan ke teman-teman semua untuk bisa di zoom in. Tapi mungkin ada beberapa dari teman-teman yang nggak punya ya. Speak of You, ya ada itunya nggak?
Ada Bu, feature-nya ada di...
Buka aja mood-nya.
Iya.
Jadi
ada speak of you ada.
Kalau memang untuk partisipasi semuanya.
Yeah.
Okay, so once I start talking, it should be me who's the main speaker there.
Yes,
Yep,
Patrick.
that's good. Excellent. So what I would like to talk about now is a framework that I find a very important framework for thinking about complexity and the way that we need to change our thinking when our situation is more complex. And so this framework has a very funny name. It's called the Cynefin Framework. It comes from Wales in the United Kingdom, and it's a word for the place where you belong, the place that gives you meaning. And it's the work of a guy called Dave Snowden. And Dave has used this framework for many years to help people think about what it means to work in complex situations. And I think it has a lot of application for all professions, but for auditors in particular, and it touches on some of the issues that we were talking about in that previous chat. And also, while, as Rasika said, we don't have a fortune-telling machine for Pactejo, we can talk about how we can use this framework to think about the future most constructively. So I'll just take you through it now, and I'm going to draw it this way, not because I can't draw a straight line, but because I don't want you to think that it's a 2x2 matrix. As you know, all of life is a 2x2 matrix, but this is not one of them. This is a sense-making, a meaning-making framework. So there are some things in life that are simple, like changing a bicycle tire. Even if you've never done it before, I can show you in about 5 minutes. And once you've got it for the rest of your life because it's simple. there are some things in life that are complicated. And complicated things mean that we have to do some sort of analysis to understand what's going on. And this is the space where a lot of engineers would work, for example. On this side of the chart here, the thing that's important is that we can see in advance what the implications of our actions will be. So if, for example, you pinch the tube between the rim and the tire of the bicycle and you try and inflate it, I can tell you what will happen. It will puncture, it will explode. And up here, you may not be able to see immediately what the implications are, but if you say to an engineer, what would happen if I put a 50-ton load on this bridge, the engineer won't know by looking, but if they have the drawings of the bridge, they'll be able to do the analysis and tell you whether or not that's safe. If you put that load on there, it'll be okay. If you put that load on there, the bridge will collapse. They can know in advance how things will play out. Now, when we come over here, things are different. So some things in life are complex. Now, it depends a little bit exactly where you live, but in many, many places, it's almost impossible to tell what the weather will be like in 1 week's time. We have a pretty good idea what the weather's going to be like today, but it's very, very difficult to tell what the weather will be like 1 week from now. Now, why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that there are lots and lots of variables, and very importantly, they interact in unusual ways, often we would say non-linear ways, and that means that a little change in one variable can have a massive impact on the system overall. And so people would say it's not literally true, but it's metaphorically true, that a butterfly beating its wings in the Amazon will cause a typhoon in Hong Kong. Now, literally that doesn't happen, but that is the way with weather systems where a small change in one variable can change the overall system in a really significant way. Now, we won't be doing any more weather forecasting today, but those same principles apply when we look at significant business challenges, when we look at significant social challenges. These sorts of challenges are almost always in this complex space. There are some things in life that are chaotic. And I used to have to explain this carefully to people, and now I just say coronavirus, and everyone understands. Because what coronavirus has done is put us, in many cases, almost overnight, into chaos. We're not really sure what's happening. We've never been in one of these before. We don't know if our health system will support us. We don't know what the government will do. All of those sorts of things are part of a chaotic environment. And so when we're in this sort of chaotic environment, what matters is to make people safe, which is why we have working from home and lockdowns and things like that, and to try to make the situation stable. And then once we've done that, then we try and figure out what's going on. Because on this side of the chart, that link between cause and effect, if we ever understand it, and we may never understand it, if we ever understand it, we can only understand it in hindsight. We can only understand it after the event. We can't see prospectively, we can't see in advance how things will play out. And that's the big difference between these two sides of the chart. Over here, we can see in advance what will happen. And over here, it's only after the fact that we might be able to understand. And that has enormous implications for the way that we work. So the first of those would be that down here in this simple space, we can have that, I think, very much overused term, best practice. There's a best practice way of changing a bicycle tire. You should just learn that and do it, and then use that best practice from there on with simple things. Up here, we can't have best practice, but we can have good practice. So about 10 years ago, I had a big injury to my knee here. And I went to see a couple of different specialists, doctors, because there's a few different ways of trying to fix the mess I've made of my knee, and it now works fine, and I appreciate your concern. And my point is actually not about my knee. My point is that in this complicated space, we often have well-regarded experts with reputable ways of doing things, but we don't yet have one best practice way of doing things. So this is a space of principles and experts, not one standard operating procedure. When we come over here, all we can have is emergent practice. That is, it's only by getting involved in the problem that we can begin to understand what the issues might be. And in that sense, our practice emerges as we involve ourselves in the system. Because we can't see in advance how things will happen, we've actually got to get in there and experiment in order to make some progress. And down here, as we now know from our experience, one of the things that we can have is novel practice. So if you had told me 12 months ago that I could be standing in my room here in Sydney and running this sort of webinar for all of you in Indonesia, and I'm just looking at a piece of glass on my desk and it all works perfectly, I would have thought that that was impossible. But we now know that these things actually work quite well. And we've been forced to be innovative, to find novel, to find new ways of working, because that's what chaos does. It actually makes us find new, alternative, different ways of doing things. And I was interested to see in the chat and on Mentimeter, a number of people saying that, you know, there were lots of challenges doing things like remote audits and so on, but other people saying that we actually need to think about this differently. We need to find new ways of doing the work that we need to do. And so it's important to understand that we need to think differently about a situation depending on where it would be on that framework. Now, I'm just going to stop and see, first of all, if Rasika has a comment, but also if anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question at this point.
I have a question, Professor
Good.
Patrick.
Good, good.
So you said that as COVID hit us, we were in the land of chaos, right?
So we were pushed into this land of chaos.
We
yes.
were pushed overnight into chaos. And then what happened was we thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to make sure our people are protected? How are we going to make sure our organization is protected? And so in the organization that I was working in, we had new processes for risk, business continuity plans being improved, We had new health and safety processes being implemented. And so does that mean that we created novel practice, but then we also went into emergent? So we went from chaos to some complexity, because we know some things, but we're still sensing what the future is.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you say? Oh, okay.
That's exactly right. So here, as you said, we had to develop all these new ways of working, new processes, new systems, and so on. One of the things I see that's happening in organizations, which is a bit sad, is that they're not capturing all of those new ways of working. And so they're going to lose the value of them because life will move on. And so we should be capturing these new ways of working. But exactly as you say, Rasika, we're now in many places, many organizations, starting to move up here and think about what might be next. And so people are talking about the next normal. They're talking about bouncing forward. They're talking about creating new opportunities post-COVID. Those sorts of things are complex work, because often what happens when you end up over here is that it's impossible to go back. You have to go through this way, and I'll explain that in just a moment.
Yeah. Well, let's see if the audience has any questions or comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Probably I will just translate a bit on Patrick's explanation.
That was good.
Bapak Ibu, ya, Bapak Ibu, yang tadi dijelaskan oleh Patrick itu adalah sebenarnya salah satu framework ya untuk problem solving, namanya Sinofin framework. Itu sebenarnya untuk membantu manajemen mengidentifikasi masalah berdasarkan hubungan penyebab dan akibatnya. Probably, I think that's a very interesting and fascinating framework, yeah, Patrick. Actually, this is quite new to me as well, because I just heard it from you, actually, just now. I would like to invite the audience here, whether any of you would like to ask a question about the Sinofin framework. Here that we still have Patrick here, while we still have Patrick and Rasika to answer our question. Probably from the audience.
Patrick,
Pak Tejo.
Yeah, oh, Pak Tejo again. Thank you. Okay, Pak. Please go ahead, Pak.
Kurniawan Tejo here. Patrick, sorry, I cannot follow all of your explanation because I have the difficulty with my hearing. Okay, but I'm trying to ask some question concerning of your explanation. How far is the horizon we are going to consider? A decade, a generation, or what? Okay, we based on what you said, what we have to consider the past and then to see the future. How far is the future we are going to see? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or one generation, two generation? How far? Because the technology is the change of the technology is integral, not slowly, not in slow movement. So we have to think. We have to think if we think internal audit is going to do like what 10 years ago are doing. Remember, we are not reviewing journal anymore because it has been taken by the machine. Okay, that's what I understand.
Yes.
Okay.
So first of all, I understand you very well, Patejo, because I also have problems with my hearing. So I'm sure we can be very good friends. But your question was very clear to me, so that's okay. You're absolutely correct to get us to think about how far into the future should we look.
Yes.
And part of the value of this framework, which I will come to in a moment, is it tells us that sometimes we can see some distance into the future. Sometimes it's impossible to see very far into the future. And sometimes we can see some of the trends and forces that will help shape the future, but we can't be exactly clear how that's going to work.
There is some blind spot still exists.
Yeah.
Blind spots, what we call blind spot, that you do not know something. Okay, really?
Yeah, that's good. I'm just looking, we've got a comment here on the chat. I would agree very much with that comment there about the emerging risks that come from being forced to find new ways of working. That's absolutely right. And the issue here, as we said, is that in the moment, what matters is to make people safe, to make the situation stable. But then there's the real work of how do we try and navigate our way out of here and up into that complex space where we need to think much more carefully about those risks. And so I'll just talk you through the next little part of this framework, and then I think that will help with understanding that.
Will we come back to the question that that's just come up here?
Yes, absolutely. About
okay.
novel practice and the risks associated with that.
Yeah,
yes,
cool.
Absolutely. So I'll be a little bit cheeky, a bit silly. So if I had done that to my knee that I did 200 years ago, and I'm not quite that old despite all this grey hair, I would have hobbled for the rest of my life because we had no surgery, no anaesthetics, we didn't know how knees worked. It would have been absolutely one of these for me. And I've told you what happened there. I could see a few doctors choose one and the knee is working. I think if I do this to my knee again in 50 years' time, to pick up on the comments of Partejo and also from in the chat box there, if I do that in 50 years' time, what I think will happen is they'll put me on a trolley, they'll put the MRI around my leg, and that data will go to the cloud, or whatever we're calling it at that stage, into the algorithm, which will instruct the robotic surgeon, and the robot will do the operation, and 2 hours later, I will be out in perfect condition.
Okay.
Because it will have become one of these. What good science, what good medicine does is it pushes things through here. And I had my own little bit of chaos, so it pushes things in that way. I'd also like to suggest that it's not just science or medicine that does that, but that's actually what good businesses do. And now we're starting to get into the question that's on the chat there. So if we take a company or an organization that we all know McDonald's. We might like the food, we might not like the food, that doesn't matter at this point, but we know McDonald's. So what's the story of McDonald's? In the 1950s in America, it was absolutely this sort of complex situation. So there was what's called a post-war baby boom, so a significant increase in the population when soldiers came home from war, and there was a significant increase in production capacity in America, and in particular, a significant increase in the number of cars. And that meant that towns and cities were trying to work out how they might design the city in order to take account of the cars. And in that sort of complex environment, the Kroc brothers and McDonald, the people who started McDonald's, decided that they would try to run restaurants. And what they did is they ran a whole lot of experiments to see what would work and what wouldn't work. And over time, they developed some principles, because you might remember we said this was a place of principles. So they developed some principles to help them run those restaurants effectively. So principles like, we have to have a standard menu or we'll never make any money. We have to have a big car park because people want to drive to the restaurant. We have to have, some people want to drive, but they don't want to stop. They just want to pick up the food and go. So we have to have a drive-through. People are bringing their families. We need some entertainment. Let's have a clown. Let's call him Ronald, and so on. And over time, they developed a set of principles that guided the development of the business. And then what they've been able to do now, in what I think is one of the marvels of the modern business world, is they've been able to get to a stage where they can take any semi-sensible 15-year-old and teach them to be a competent kitchen hand or customer service representative. And if you go to McDonald's almost anywhere in the world, the people on the who are serving you are, for the most part, those sorts of young people. And McDonald's are absolutely superb at being able to take those young people and teach them to flip burgers and serve customers, and then to run a crew, and then to train new people in the crew, and then to run a whole shift, and then to run a whole restaurant. And they really are superb at doing that sort of thing. So one of the reasons why McDonald's is such a successful global organization is that they're really good at moving through that cycle of dealing with complexities, finding principles, and then developing best practice from that.
Okay.
But there's a little catch to this. So today, as McDonald's is teaching 15-year-olds to flip burgers, they're dealing with a global obesity epidemic and a worldwide backlash against fast food. And that's one of those situations. And so for McDonald's, but I think for every organization, they have a little bit of this, or a lot of that actually, and a bit of this and a bit of that, and even some of that occasionally. And that matters because the way that you make decisions and the way that you would work as an auditor or a risk professional or a compliance professional needs to be different depending on which of these spaces you're in. And so it makes perfect sense down here that you have a standard procedure so that when you get to the front of the queue at McDonald's, the whole transaction happens very smoothly. But if you want, as McDonald's, to deal with the impact of a global obesity epidemic and people saying that fast food is really bad for you, you can't work in the same way. What you've actually got to do for problems that are up here is a lot of consultation and, what McDonald's is so good at, lots more experimentation to find new ways of working. And this really goes to that question, the third one from the bottom there, about one of the risks here is that as we move through here, we have to try new things. It's the only way we can make progress. But we need to make sure that we're managing the risks on that. And one of the things that's really important is, particularly in this space here, we're very thoughtful about what are the boundaries within which we can operate. What are the things we're allowed to do and what are the things that we must not do. And those boundaries are really, really important. And so from an audit perspective, you should still be encouraging experiments, but you don't want crazy experiments. You want experiments within the boundaries of what we know to be safe.
Your vision.
So I'm interested in comments. We've got some good observations coming through on the chat there. Would anyone like to ask a question at this point? Or Rasika, if you've got an observation?
Well, I think one thing that there is a question. Given that I've started speaking, I'll quickly make my contribution.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, and we'll talk about this later on, is when we're working in the area of complexity and chaos, so on the left, and I won't call them quadrants, it's emergent practice, right? So decision-making, the way you make decisions in each of those quadrants varies, right? Because if you look at did I just call it quadrant? The simple and complicated, the way to make decisions is somewhat understood, whereas in the others, it's emergent. And so in those sorts of situations, you don't necessarily have a system that you can use. And so in that instance, I personally think it's really important, and I think this is where I think audit professionals can add value to the business side, is mainstreaming the understanding of key elements of risk, key elements from a controls perspective, and key elements from an audit standpoint, so that we are minimizing some of those unintended consequences that you talked about, Patrick, in the McDonald's example. Yeah. So I think there's a real teaching role, capability building role that I think the cohort here can play. But I'll pause there and maybe we'll go to the audience for questions, Patrick.
Yes.
So we've got a
hello.
couple here. Yes, please.
Hello. Yeah, this is just my simple opinion. Yeah, some practice will become the next best practice, but some maybe will be back to the old ways. So I'll just give simple example. For now, maybe most of us will be not eating out in cafe anymore, right? But I believe when the pandemic is over, I miss eating out in a cafe or in a nice restaurant. Yeah. I think will be less people still ordering food to their house. Yeah. So how far these practices will be stand and becoming the new normal, or what will be back to the old ways?
Yeah, so let me give a way of understanding that. I think one of the things that's important in this complex space is to acknowledge that it will change. You know, you said when the pandemic is over, you know, things will change, and therefore, what's really important up here is what people call situational awareness, to actually make sure that you're watching really carefully what is happening in the environment, and wherever you can, it's not always possible, but wherever you can, to look for the early indicators that things might be going to change. So in Australia, we're in a reasonably good position with regard to COVID, and we're now starting to see people going back to offices. And I'm very interested to see whether everyone will go back to the office or only some people will go back to the office. And so I'm talking to lots of different people in lots of different organisations just to listen and see what they're saying, to get an understanding of how that might play out, so that we can start to be prepared for that sort of thing. It's impossible to predict exactly, but we give ourselves the best chance of understanding it if we look broadly at things that are going on. And if I can pick up on a very good observation, the last question that's currently on the chat there, about risk appetite. So it's absolutely true that you need a different risk appetite in the complex space than you would in the simple space. Because for things that are in the simple space, we know these very well. We can control them really tightly. We have a standard set of steps that we use to do this, and we should be following that. But when we're up here in this complex space, and the same is true in this chaotic space, we don't know those things, and therefore we need a different way of thinking about risk. And that's why I said before, thinking about what are the boundaries of things that we will do, but allowing for experimentation within that is really, really important. And picking up with the question that's above that, another thing that's important everywhere, but very important here, is that we keep reminding people about the purpose of the organisation. What's our real overall purpose and objective? Because that will help us navigate towards the right place. And so organisations that have done this well through the pandemic have consistently communicated with their people about the purpose of the organisation, and we will remain true to that, but we might need to find new ways of working to achieve those things. So good questions on the chat and from that comment. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, Patrick, actually there's one more question coming in from Pak Diki Krishna, and he asked for the chaotic problem, how actually that we know for sure that our action right now is currently right on track to solve the problem, because it's going to be in advance that we know that this is the right decision or the right track that to solve the problem, like COVID right now. How does everyone ensure that this is the right decision that they make, and who will review the consequences?
Yep.
Yeah.
Really, really good question. Really good question. So there are two parts to this. The first is a more general comment. On this side, so in chaotic and in complex, we need to admit, we need to be aware that anything we do will have unintended consequences. Even if we act with the very best interests of the organisation at heart, sometimes things will happen that are not what we intended. And that just increases, for me, that need for situational awareness. So we're understanding what the impact of our actions is, because we only know that when we get in and try things. So that part of it is really, really important. The second part of it is that in the chaotic space, which is where that question came from, the primary goal there is to make people safe and to make the situation stable. In doing that, we will many times have to overshoot. We'll have to be too strict until we really understand what's going on. And so, Rasika will know this very well because it's what has happened in Melbourne. Melbourne had a spike in coronavirus cases, and what they did in the state of Victoria, where Rasika lives, is they decided that it was very important to make people safe and to reduce the COVID situation. And so they put in place a very strict lockdown for a long period of time. 10 weeks altogether, Rasika, was it?
Nearly.
Yeah. And so could they have done that with 5 weeks? Maybe. Could they have done it with 6 weeks? Maybe. But the really safe thing was to be too careful and have a complete lockdown 10 weeks. And now in Victoria, for the past 3 weeks, they have 0 cases. So here, where we're trying to make people safe, to make the situation stable, we often need to be too strict, too controlling until the crisis is resolved. And then we can move up here. And as that very good question on the chat says, to readjust our risk appetite so we can start to experiment to find new ways of working. So really good question. Thank you. Any last question? I've just got a few more little pieces of this that I think are very, very important for audit professionals. Okay, so another piece of this, because this is it's a wonderful framework. I could talk about this for days. There's lots of good things to draw out of it. But just one more, and then I'll be interested in your comments, is this boundary here is different from the others, because when things go wrong here, they tend not to go back up into there. They tend to go off the cliff and into chaos. And it's almost impossible to go back that way. So if you think about running a call center, so best practice for a call center is to have a good, solid, robust phone system and a separate standalone backup system, which is all well and good until this one fails and that one won't boot. And then you're left with nothing. And you've got thousands of people who are ringing in, trying to transact or order or make inquiries, and you're absolutely in this space here. So you need to listen carefully to this bit because it's a little bit subtle. Organizations definitely need to put things down here because this is the space of efficiency for organizations. If we've got well-tested, tried, true, reliable ways of doing things, that's when organizations are most effective and most efficient. But we shouldn't assume that because something was our best practice today, that it will still be best practice a week, a month, a year from now. Because in a way, this moves through time, and things that can be best practice today can, because of a change in technology, a change in regulation, a new competitor, any of those sort of things, and suddenly we're over here, our processes are no longer efficient enough, we're losing market share to competitors, whatever it might be. And so historically, auditors have had a very strong, very important role to make sure that these sorts of processes are robust and reliable and being followed carefully. And that will always be true. I think the next piece of this for audit professionals is to bring that situational awareness that we were talking about before to the work of auditing in this space. Because in addition to saying, are we following our processes properly? Then the other question is, are our processes still the right processes? And we can only answer that question if we're looking up and out at what's happening more broadly in the environment. So, any other thoughts or questions?
Patrick,
Joe.
Yeah. Okay. From your explanation, are you implying that every condition we should, in every condition, we should have these 4 aspects ready for us. So in good condition, in the well-running condition, we can use simple, and then we can use the best practice. But we have to be also get ready also for this chaotic, or we have to compel to the complicated and or to the complex situation. Are you implying that, or suggesting like that?
Yeah. So Partejo, again, two comments on that. So the first is that, as I said a moment ago, for any organisation, and I've talked about McDonald's, but the same would be true of your organisation, of all of our organisations, we'll have quite a bit of this, and some of that, and some of that, and some of that. So in an organisation, we will have some of all of those things. But the other part of your question, which I think is really valuable, is that good leaders, good professionals know that in a way you've almost got to stand in the middle here when you get a new challenge and say, is it one of these? Is it one of these? Is it one of these? Or is it one of those? Because we need to respond differently depending on which domain these things are in. So if there's a new audit challenge, for example, about a well-established process, oh, that's one of those, we do it this way. If it's an audit cycle in a chaotic environment, we would approach that quite differently. And if it's an audit cycle up here with complex things, as we've said, we would be expecting that people would experiment, and therefore we would have a different risk profile for things up here than we would have for things down there. And the way to deal with that is to stand in the middle here and think, which of these do I have?
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Partejo.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Ratipur is asking really good questions here. I'm enjoying them. I can't see you on my screen here, but I can see you on the chat. Very, very good questions. So adjusting the risk appetite on complex practice is a must then, yes. And we need to continue adjusting when it does work or even works better. So what that picks up is a very important idea that up here, because we are experimenting, there are things that will work and things that won't work. And we need to be watching that and working out how we can do more of the things that are working well and stop the things that are not working. So it requires a different sort of vigilance, a different sort of attention compared to what we might have down here, because it is the nature of things up here that some will work and some won't. Whereas down here, where we have a best practice way of doing it, we should be getting the right result every time because it's best practice. And that's the way that we would adjust up here to make sure that we can accelerate things that are working and stop things that are not working.
Yep. Thank you very much for the explanation. Yeah, so I'm from the organization that have changed a lot. So the things with adjusting risk appetite and having a continued collaboration with enterprise risk management is very essential for my audit department to support the business growth. So that's why I'm just confirming what I'm understanding so far, and apparently it's quite being applicable. So it's good to hear from you directly. Thank you.
That's fine. They were really good questions. Should I say Ibu Rati? Would that be right?
Yes, you can call me Rati. Yeah.
So Ibu Rati, I think that's exactly right. To know what belongs where. And the other thing that you have mentioned that I think is really important is how important it is to have a strong relationship with your compliance and risk colleagues. because you need to work in different ways depending on the, you know, the challenge in the part of the business that you're working on. And so that strong collaboration, as you've mentioned there, between the risk function and the audit function is critical for understanding the real work that needs to be done. So thank you.
Yeah, because we need to have a same voice with the management that change frequently. I mean, if we have a different voice between audit and risk management, it will create a confusion with management where they already have so many challenges in this kind of chaotic situation. So I think it's a very important values for the governance functions to collaborate and give the same advice or to the management to facing this kind of situations. I mean, don't give another challenges to them. We should able to give the right value at the situations.
Yes, and Ibarati, one more important point that your very good observation again reminds us is that we may need a different pace of meetings and of audit depending on where we are. Because if we're working on something that the organisation has done for the last 5 years and we all know how it works, if we get together once a quarter, once every 3 months and talk about that, that's probably okay. When we're trying to manage our risk audit compliance work in the midst of the COVID crisis, we need to be meeting much more frequently because the situation changes so often, and therefore we need to have, I think, an even stronger relationship with those other important parts of the business.
Yeah.
And to make sure we're meeting more frequently.
Yeah, true. I think that's an important condition as well for us to get more info, more frequent from the management so we can deliver the right advisory at the right time, at the right situations. I mean, there's no absolute right answer. So we can just try and then see the result and then adjusting again. And if it is not work, and then we try to give another advisory together with the management and see how it goes until it comes to the simple or best practice situations again, I guess.
Yes, that's right, Ibarati. And here in the simple space, we should expect a right answer because we've got a standard process. But up here, it's often
yes,
very
true.
difficult to, sometimes it's even difficult to know what the right question is, let alone what the right answer is. And therefore, what we're often trying to do up here is not instantly solve the problem, but to continue to make progress. And that progress, exactly as you've said, is best done collaboratively with the other professionals with whom you work. Your risk colleagues, the senior management team, your compliance colleagues, they're all important for understanding what we're doing and are we making progress in these spaces.
Yep, thank you for confirming that.
Thank you.
Great. Actually, Patrick, I have one more question coming in from the chat. This one is from Pak Arif Kurniadi. He asks about how if the business face these many challenges in front of us, starting from the complex to chaotic problem or situation. However, the owner and the top management always concerned about the cost, and cost is always have been the major constraint. And how can internal audit takes the role to overcome this?
Yes, it's very difficult to work. Oh, no. The question is a very good question because everywhere
but the answer is difficult, yeah.
Everywhere I work in the world, this is a question. Yeah, it's very difficult to work with bosses who hold the money very tight and won't provide the resources to do the right work. Absolutely. And then I think while it's not easy, it's important to think about prioritization. And often what matters is to make people safe. That should be our #1 priority. But that may mean that we do a little bit less in some of these other spaces till we have this organised. But it's a very difficult question. I wish I had a perfect answer for it, but it's very, very tricky. And if I can go to the last question that's appearing on the chat at the moment. So is this a life cycle? It is, but. So it is in the sense that we would normally work our way through in that direction. It's almost impossible to come from here to there. And so we normally need to go around that way. If we, for example, don't have good business continuity plans, then we can be here and the business will just disappear. We'll be insolvent, we'll go broke because we haven't thought in advance how we would respond to this sort of crisis. So again, from a risk and compliance and audit perspective, it's valuable to make sure that we do have, before we need them, the right business continuity plans. When we come up here, what we're doing is we're often trying to navigate a very uncertain future. And so things like scenario planning, which Rasika will talk about in a moment, are really important here. The other thing, though, is that in very, very complex situations, you may spend lots of time just going around and around and around here because it's so hard to find the answer. But it is possible to make progress and then come over here and eventually make best practice out of things. Rasika, would this be a good time for us to move on?
I think so. We've got a few things a few more things to go through. We've got some comments about about how to deal with practice like this. So communicate early, often and sufficiently with stakeholders to maintain trust and confidence.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly.
I don't know how much you follow US politics. It's very, very turbulent, very complex at the moment. You would probably be aware that they are managing the coronavirus situation very, very badly. They've had over 250,000 deaths there. They really have managed it badly. Barack Obama has just published a book about his time as president, and he had to deal with a smaller epidemic, the SARS, which also impacted us in the Asian region. And he said his advice at that time, when people said, how are we going to deal with the pandemic, was that we will always tell the truth, we will communicate frequently, and we will rely on the experts, the scientists. And so, you know, I think picked up in that last comment there is those very similar notions, you know, about communicating early and often and bringing the stakeholders in and always telling the truth, which of course would be at the heart of any good audit practice. It is about truth and integrity. Those sorts of things are very, very important.
Are you saying that the Trump's presidency now hasn't done that Barack has done before?
He hasn't done any of those things properly, Dewi.
I guess you're hidden supporter then.
I'm going to jump in and go, we will not talk politics.
Yes.
Okay, Patrick and Rasika, we just have about half an hour. I think if you have some more materials to...
Yeah, we do.
I think we can continue. Yeah.
One last observation from me on the slides, Rasika. And then I'll let you move through from there. So if you want to
Sure.
share the slides now, I just want
Sure.
to
I'll do
touch
that. Just hang
on
on one sec.
one last comment.
Yeah, give me 1 second now.
Last comment.
Okay, can you guys see that?
So if you take us through to, you'll need to click through quite a few here.
Next one.
Yep, keep going. That one. I just want to leave you with one last thought. No, back one, Rasika. That's it. Don't touch anything.
There's a bit of a lag, I think, Patrick. So
that's okay. I think we're all right now. I want to leave you with one last thought. We often think in businesses that we need to put in place processes and structures that are really robust. It is the nature of robust things that they work until they fail, and when they fail catastrophically. So if you think about a bridge like that, it's a good, strong, solid bridge, but when it fails, the whole bridge will end up in the river. I think we should be looking to build organizations that are more resilient. And a really good example of that is a palm tree. A palm tree is actually really strong because it's flexible and it can withstand really strong storms because it's got some flexibility in it. And I think one of our lessons out of this coronavirus time is that we should be building resilient organizations that have the situational awareness and the flexibility to be able to respond to challenging situations. Rasika, you've got some thoughts on this too.
yeah, I do. I have lots of thoughts, and I think I've spent a lot of my time during this pandemic thinking about my own personal resilience and the resilience of the companies that I've worked with and spent time with. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the characteristics of resilience, whether it's resilience in terms of you as a person or whether it's resilience in terms of the organization. And Patrick and I were going to have a conversation around this. We'll see how we go because we are limited in time. So Patrick, please jump in and give me some additional points to talk to the group about. So as Patrick said, he used the example of the coconut tree or the palm tree, so to speak. So it's the ability to actually bounce back not just quickly, but in the most appropriate way to the context. So the horizon scanning, looking at where you are. And when I look at strategy, I often talk about being on the balcony and then being on the dance floor. So how do you alternate between taking a bird's eye view of what's happening and then jumping down to the process level, to the policy level? So as audit professionals, often you're thinking about what is it that I need to be checking off on my list? What additional questions do I need to be asking? At the same time, what we're proposing is step up to take a holistic view of what's actually going on. That then relates to the next point. Resilience is actually a function of your ability to anticipate what's coming up. I won't talk about this too much because I think when we talked about the Carnarvon framework, there was lots of questions about how do we look to the future? What is our crystal ball telling us? We may not have all the answers, but to be looking beyond the boundary in which we're working at the moment becomes really, really important. The next point here is your ability to adapt. And I think we know this, so I'm not going to talk too much. But again, if we're working in the space of complexity and chaos, it's actually our ability to create and recreate that and I loved the sentence that Patrick used. Are we asking the right sort of questions that take us into the future and create a future that we want? Now, the next one, I love this one because this is something that I have tried to build in my own self, and I've encouraged most of my teams to be able to do this as well. Our ability to work with ambiguity. And I think as humans, we find it very, very difficult often to work in times of change. We love change, we love new things, but when that change is actually thrust upon us, we're often in a space where we're used to doing systematic process related things. And so what skills can you develop within yourself that make you comfortable to work in a space where you don't know all the answers, but you can still try to sense and work with the future? Patrick, do you want to add anything to what I've said so far?
Only very quickly that down here in the simple space and even in the complicated, there's probably not much ambiguity, but your ability to work with ambiguity is critical in this complex and chaotic space here. It's very difficult to be successful unless you develop that willingness to engage with different ideas.
Yeah, and not knowing where the future is going. And I think as much as this is about strategy and risk management frameworks and how audit should work, it's about building your personal capability. So if there's one thing that you took away from today, I would say, think about how you respond with ambiguity when the situation around you is ambiguous. And in turn, how can you help others in the organization deal with that themselves and then create something constructive? So future business direction, for instance, out of it. Resilience, the ability to make sense of an emerging future. And the framework that Patrick presented is really at the heart of this, right? So take a step back when everything seems unknown. Go into the center of the Cynefin framework and ask yourself questions about where you fit within that model. And that model is an excellent way of you determining the sort of action that you need to take or your team needs to take. And then that gives you a bit of a framework or a system to work with within your own head. Okay, I'm thinking we might actually skip some of these Menti questions. Are you happy with that, Patrick? We keep going?
Yeah, I think we should do at least one before the end, Rasika. So
yeah,
you can choose which one that is.
What we might do is we might go through the material really quickly and then go to Menti so that we can actually have a conversation.
Sure.
But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those in the chat box. So the great news is that from an audit perspective and as audit professionals, you already have the key skills required to help your business partners achieve resilience. Just a quick reminder of what those are. So as auditors, you think critically, right? You're constantly solving problems. You're applying and evaluating ways of working, whether it be from a process perspective or critically thinking about where is the gap in the process in my organization. Now, what we're saying is take that skill and see how you can actually work with the strategic part of your organization or with the governance, risk and compliance side of your organization. Again, asking the what if questions, right? And so this then relates back to a concept that Patrick touched on, which was really looking at the different scenarios that a business could be faced with. So at the moment, maybe you're working at the process level, but remember the skill that you have is much, much broader and much, much more valuable than that. I love this one. We already talked about this, working across silos and boundaries. So I think the comment that was made about looking at integrate, and that's the beauty of integrated GRC, right? It's really asking each organization to bring those functions together, and not for audit to be a separate function, not for risk to be a separate function, or governance. Of course, there's separation of duties that are actually required to ensure integrity of each of those functions. But at the same time, there's a lot of value to be garnered from having tight feedback loops between those few functions. The next is utilizing your skills in asking the what if questions, asking, thinking critically. What we're proposing is, what can you do? How can you be involved in actually planning for different business scenarios? Because that enables you to be like the palm tree or the coconut tree, right? Because you've thought about the different options that your business could take, and you can move. And similarly, how can you actually participate in planning for and responding to incidents? It's almost like in the military, where you have different drills to see how you respond when you're called to action, right? It's almost like that. I used to spend the initial years of my career in the software industry. And so we used to implement systems over a 6-hour window, like large banking systems that processed millions and millions of dollars. And what we used to do is we used to rehearse implementation and rollback 5 or 6 times so that we didn't jeopardize our customers. Similarly, in this instance, you're talking about the broader business operations. I think lastly, you guys have a really, really valuable role to play, especially when you're looking on the left-hand side of the framework that Patrick presented. When you're working in a dynamic system, how do you actually mainstream the risk hat, the audit hat, the compliance hat, when change is happening constantly, right? Should we be only thinking like an auditor during the time of audit? Should we be only thinking like a risk professional at that time? Wouldn't it be great if your whole organization understood what it meant and it was mainstreamed, so it wasn't an add-on? We've talked about this already. Fitness, agility, and constantly expanding. Patrick made a funny comment yesterday that as long as audit doesn't have to have the sweatband that this guy is wearing, but really thinking about how you can be agile. It's not just about an IT project anymore. It's about the whole organization. Now, I don't know if you knew this, and I didn't know this until I started thinking about our presentation today, but audit actually comes from from a Latin verb which means to hear, right? And the audit profession started off by creating that space for you to listen to discrepancies from a financial management and reporting perspective. That's what auditors originally started doing, and then the scope of it increased. And so I think actively thinking about the information that you want to feed back to governance and risk to make better decisions is going to be really important, and how emerging risks can actually be thought about, mitigated, and in turn feed into strategy is really important. Of course, this needs to happen in a timely way with lots of vigilance. Patrick, do you want to add anything about this or to this?
No, there's a question on the chat that I'd like to respond to in a moment, but not specifically to
sure. This. We'll quickly run through the rest of the material.
Yeah, or I might leave my second part for another day, because I'm keen to hear from the people on the session.
Sure.
So we might go to a Mentimeter question in a moment.
How are we going for time? All right, so we've got about 15 minutes. I think we're nearly done here.
Yep.
So if we think about the sorts of questions that you can be asking yourself, there's questions around data and reporting, and I know that you've been looking at data and reporting from in terms of audit, but think about data and reporting from a strategic decision-making perspective. I think Patrick mentioned, you know, how often, how quickly, and the nature of how you're working with the rest of the organization. So there's probably something to think about. There was a question in the chat earlier about the rate of change and how quickly should we be adapting to technology changes or process changes, and that's becoming increasingly important. And then the other thing that we would say, and we touched on this during sort of the horizon scanning element, is, you know, maintain vigilance to actually see what's up and coming on the horizon. I think we'll be sending out slides after this, so I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail because we want to have the conversations.
Just
we've
one
talked about...
Rasika, if we can just go back one slide, and if I can link it into Serena's comment on the chat.
Sure, go for it.
Go back to your questions if we can.
Which one's this one here?
That's it. Thank you.
Yep.
So Serena's question, again, a superb question. So if we can't immediately go back to the old best practice, should we be thinking about a new normal for our audit practice? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. Not in the sense that we have to throw out everything we did before, but that we need to ask ourselves some new questions. And I think these questions that Rasika has on the slide here are a fantastic place to start that thinking. You know, the ones at the bottom, how could the core audit function evolve? Those sorts of questions are critical for thinking about the new normal for an audit practice. So I think it ties together really nicely, Rasika.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I hadn't seen the question, so it's good timing to bring it together. I actually have a whole bunch of other questions, but it all didn't fit in the slide. So we might actually share all of them if people find it interesting. Okay, I want to get to the Mentimeter question, so I'm going to speed through the rest again really quickly. Why aren't you moving? Oh, hello. What happened to this?
So that's my bills, Rasika, for the...
Yeah. So do you want to hold off on this, Patrick, and we'll jump to Menti?
Nearly 15 minutes.
Okay. So, folks, what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our friend Mentimeter again, and we will run through a couple of key questions. Just give me 1 second while I get this up and running. This is a test of agility, everyone. How can I be agile and not lose my marbles? Okay. Oh, hello. Okay, all right. So should we get people to respond to this question, Patrick? So what do you think you as an auditor can do to actually help your organization be more resilient? Hopefully we've given you some things to think about. So I think we're going to spend 2 minutes because we've got a few Mentimeter questions to go through. So please put through your responses. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Are you sure you're not going to go independent enough? I love it. Did you see? It's great. Agile audit, fantastic. I've heard a lot of people talking about this. Encourage organizations to work with benchmarks. Patrick, what do we do when we don't have benchmarks or the benchmarks don't apply anymore?
So
I just thought I'd throw that question to you.
So benchmarks are really useful in the complicated and simple spaces. They can be misleading for complex things unless you're deeply aware of the context in which the benchmark was created. Because it's easy to find benchmarks, they just might not be the right benchmarks.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of comments here about collaboration, which is really nice. Act as a consultant, so an internal consultant.
Yep. That point about continuous learning's very important.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll give people maybe 1 more minute or 30 seconds to add some more.
Yeah.
Show them the result you got, for example, and let them set the tone about agile spirit within the organization. It's great. Give confidence to the board about whether the right control is in place. Okay. Shall we keep? There's more. Patrick, have you read this one? Gain trust from management and become a catalyst between siloed functions.
Yes, yes.
That's great.
That's wonderful.
I think agile is also the main theme here, yeah, Rasika.
That's right.
Being
Agility.
agile and closely collaborate with the management, yeah.
Okay.
Do you think
we'll
it's
keep
the best answer?
I don't think there's one best answer.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, as we can see, a lot of this is yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of this is coming back to mindset and shifting mindset. Patrick, I'm thinking that your last slide might actually be good to touch on, the to from slide, maybe, if we have a minute at the end.
I think if you'd like to do that, Rasika, I'm happy to do it.
Well, we'll go through these and see if there's any more Q&A.
Sure.
But
absolutely.
Okay, what's the main idea that you've taken away from today's session? Let me just check what else we've got. Okay, all right. So tell us about what you learnt today. And in the meantime, while people are putting their answers in, should we start with some Q&A?
Cinefin framework. Wow. That's the same answer from me.
Yeah, great. Being resilient, being attractive, being adaptive. Yep. That's what I meant to say. You know, I started working in Agile probably 12 years ago when I started working, 12 to 15 years ago. And that was when I was in the software industry. And the great thing is to see that being adopted across all business practice in a different way, but across boundaries. If people have any questions, they can start speaking, or they can put it in the chat box, given that we're short on time.
Bapak Ibu ada yang ingin bertanya lagi, silakan. Kita masih ada punya waktu sekitar 10 menit, 10 minutes ya. Mumpung ini ada Rasika dan Patrick di sini masih menemani kita. I don't see any more coming question from the chat box ya. Agile, adaptive, resilience.
It seems to be the theme of the day.
Right.
Linchpin. You really, it is a linchpin, isn't it, from a GRC perspective? Okay, Patrick, do you have any comments to make about that? Because the next Menti question is a feedback question.
No, it's lovely to see that people have been listening and thinking about what we've covered today. because what I'm seeing here is not just people are putting up a word they're familiar with. People have really thought about this and what it means for their organizations, and I'm very encouraged by that. That's wonderful.
Oh my gosh, I love, there's two statements that I love. Chaos brings opportunity,
Yes.
and auditors have the capacity and they're capable, which is really awesome.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we might go to the last question, which is, we'd love to hear your feedback on what you thought.
Aren't we, sorry, aren't we, does it mean we are too demanding for the auditors? we keep on demanding them to be like this, like this, like this, like this. While the other, for example, the top management or the commissioner or the other not thinking like that. Have a survey ever been made concerning what the idea auditors are doing from the top management perspective? I believe it is still a decade ago. Now, if they do not change, how can you demand you demand the audit change? That's my opinion.
I agree. It comes down to leadership. Patrick?
I think it definitely comes down to leadership, but I'd also, Patecho, I think that in another sense, everyone in the organization can exercise leadership and can try and have the right conversations with people to drive some change. Sometimes that won't happen overnight. That will take some time. But I think, you know, anyone in any professional discipline needs to be thinking about how they can contribute to progress, even if it's not easy.
And it's about being resilient at a personal level.
Yeah.
To tap away and create that change.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
Great.
Okay.
That's fine. Rasika, would it be useful to hand back to Ibu Dewi or someone else in the team?
Yeah, so they can do a wrap up.
Very good feedback. Yeah, thank you, everybody. So, all right, I guess we've come to our end. Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick and Rasika, for the sharing. It's very insightful and eye-opening, especially the Xenofin framework. Yeah, to me, it's quite new concept, but I think it's very good framework, and for us to continue to learn about it, and as an auditor as well, so we can understand what kind of situation that the business face and the ambiguity of it, so that we can give a more accurate analysis and give solutive, and creative recommendation for that. So I think there is the end of our session today. Hopefully our discussion today will bring benefit to all the participants. Thank you so much for joining us, and probably acaranya saya kembalikan ke Pak Eko ya Pak, who will close the event. And thank you so much once again, Rasika and Patrick, for the sharing.